Okay, so I've brought those three texture maps from Maya into Photoshop. So here's the ambient occlusion and the normal map, and as well as that we've got the diffuse map. This is color ID. We've used this purely for selection. You can easily select the different colors that we've got in here. Currently I have contiguous turned off, which means if I select pink, for example, it selects everything of that color. I can turn it on and it will only select that area. So that's quite useful, and we'll come back to that. But to start with, we're using this ambient occlusion as our primary base to build all of the colors. Now the first thing I want to do is get a base color. I've got a couple of metallic textures here that I've brought in from various places. It's actually cgtextures.com. So I'm just pasting this texture. This is our base. Good habit to name things. Now, it doesn't give me, it's not particularly larger than the image I'm working with, so I can't really move it around too much. That's probably good enough really for what I'm trying to do. Now, if we set ambient occlusion to linear burn, sorry, it looks like I actually had that set before we started, so that's the ambient occlusion by default. Linear burn, so part of the darken series. So that gives us our base color. What I want to do is add some paint to that. So I'll make a new layer, paint, and I'll actually select the normal map with the magic wand. Just holding down shift and just adding to the selection that I want to take on the paint effect. So everything on the interior. I guess we'll get the background of that section. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So just using that as a selection set. Come back to this paint layer, and what I'll do is pick a color. I think that light blue, I'm happy with that. I'll go into fill, edit fill, foreground color, and we'll fill that. So it gives us what would work as a paint layer. Probably need to lighten. Okay, so if I set that to a darken color, that brings in just a few of the scratches, which is kind of nice. I'm definitely after a worn kind of look, but just for a moment what I'll do is actually leave it on normal, and I'll use this scratched up metal texture I've found, and I'll paste that in there on a new layer, which is quite large. So I'll just shrink it down a little bit, and the way I'm going to use this, I might just rotate it. It tends to have more of the scratches on one side. Yeah, so the way I want to use this is the lighter colors, using my blending modes to get the effect of the paint scratching coming through. So basically, if I set this to yeah, lighter color, you can see how that's working. It's anything that's light is being brought through with those scratches. I might tone it down just a notch. Basically, if you brought that right down, you end up getting transparency. So it's like it's a little bit on the faded side. Yeah, so it's pretty beat up. More or less happy with that. Now I can come through and do that with everything in the scene. So I might just select the bolts, for example. So contiguous turned off, magic wand those bolts, and I'll add a new paint layer. Bolts, pick my color. I'll just go for a lighter shade of this blue and fill the foreground with that. Fill, foreground. So that's quite nice. It's not super obvious. It's just a light effect that I'm after. Now I'll do the same with, I'll make these things light. So, whoops. Call this lights. What I'm talking about is these. Select mode. These grey areas. Oh, of course. Because that's grey, it's selecting the whole lot. I'm just holding down Shift to select those two that I want. Now this one, kind of want slight yellow to it, perhaps even a touch of green. Fill foreground color. This blue stuff. Oops. I don't know what these things are called. This levers, panels. Pick a color. And just finally the red. Okay, now at the moment I'm getting this sort of transparent kind of look for all of these layers. It's because this ambient occlusion layer is set to a linear burn. I really only need that for the paint. So I'll bring both of these layers down just above the paint. So it's getting that linear burn onto the paint to get that effect I'm after, but it's also making these other colors fill 100%, which is actually what I'm after for now. These lights, I might just change the color of those to white. And I can turn those into an actual light. Here, if I add a outer glow, there we go, outer glow. Might select a light blue color. Yeah, so you can see as I play with the opacity there, you can see that glow effect. I might just spread that a little. Too much. Sort of the effect I'm after. Cool, so there's the light effect. I might also just shrink the actual light effect a little bit. It just seems like it's a little thick. Basically, it's covering the housing of the light. Copy that one over here. I don't seem to have the glow. I'll select this layer and merge it down. Merge down, Control E is what I normally do. So yeah, it's a much better effect. So it's the lights that I'm after. Okay, so these layers that I've put on, so the bolt layer, just turn the opacity down a little bit so we can now get the effect underneath. So only, in this case I've probably turned it down a little too far, but I definitely wanted a slight effect. But I'm not sold on the lighter colour. I might try almost a grey really, just a dark colour. That's filling that with a foreground. And yes, that's I'm happier with that, although I may turn the opacity back up so I get some more colour in there. Cool. We'll do the same with everything else. I'll just turn the lights, I'll leave the lights up full because they're meant to be glowing. I'm going to add a diffuse effect inside of Unity when we get to that. The panels, we'll just turn opacity down. So we're getting the sense of 3D. It's looking a lot better than just that solid fill. Same with these guys. I'll just collapse that layer so they're on the same layer, and much better to actually see the shape underneath. I'm not happy with how that layer's gone, partly because the way I manually selected those, they didn't really line up very well. But also, the colour's not working for me. So I might try again. We'll just go straight with that red. I'm not convinced I need that to make that a different color to this. I'll just grab the eyedropper tool and try this dark blue I've got down here and see if that's any good. It definitely looks better than before. I think if I add some highlights to it, it'll probably work out for me. I might just make that a bit lighter though. All right. Just doesn't feel like it's working. So I think I'll stick with the same color as the base. Just a slight, like it's raised up a bit, so it's a slightly lighter color. All right. One thing I'm not too happy with is I've got the top section's cutting out the glow from the lights. I'll try just putting the lights above. Yep, so now we're getting a bit of a glow on there. Okay, the next thing that I'm concerned about is that I've got a lot of scratching in this effect from this paint layer inside the depths. So I just want to fix that up. What I'll do is make a new layer. Now I'll just manually select the sections I want covered and actually just fill them. Probably with this sort of color, but perhaps a little bit darker. Just wondering if I have a easy selection. Doesn't look, I do for parts of it. Here, for example, not happy. Paint buckets and just fill these with grey. So yeah, just Control C, copy, Control V, paste. Holding down Shift as I drag it, just quickly snaps it to the other side. I might be able to wand that, probably not. On the ambient occlusion layer. So probably quickest to hold down Alt to unselect everything I don't want. Yeah, that gives me a nice fill. Back to my fill layer. Just remember to collapse these. So Control E just snaps it down to the layer underneath it. And now, if we turn off a little bit of opaqueness, so it's, we can see a little bit of the underside coming through. And in addition to that, I'll select it all and just shrink it a little bit. Select, modify, contract, and we'll just contract it by maybe 2 pixels. Now if I inverse that selection, which is Shift Control I, just hit delete. It just deletes everything outside of the 2 pixels I just contracted. So that seems to work reasonably well. Okay, so now I want to add some fading and wear and tear along the edges. I've turned off the back paint. I'm just going to work on this layer here. All I'm going to do is select the eraser tool and select a soft brush for it. I'll just turn down the size a fair bit, and I'll probably turn down the opacity. I want to be gentle. And I'm just going to go through and basically fade out these edges. Different approaches. You could just make a new layer on top and go through and basically paint the effect you're after. I might just turn on my tablet settings just to get the pressure sensitivity working. That's better. So now I can, it's very faint unless I press down a lot harder. It's kind of what I want. And it's simply a matter of going through and bringing in that detail that you're after. This section is sped up quite a bit. All I'm doing is going through with the eraser tool. I've set the opacity and the flow down a bit, and I'm just going through using the Wacom to gently erase those edges. So that just helps the paint sort of fade in a little bit more realistically. Something that's so scratched up like this, it should have a bit of fading going on, especially towards the edges of those surfaces. We should actually be seeing a little bit of the metallic come through from those corner edges. So that's very straightforward on the paint layer. So now I'm going to go through and just export out the shaders that we need. So I've got the my diffuse texture here. I'm just going to save this as a PNG. PNG is a great format for Unity. You want to name everything with a sensible name. So I'm calling this panel, and this one will be my diffuse. Stick with a naming convention that makes sense, that you can easily identify what's what. So diffuse or color, that's what this one is. PNG, it's a nice level of compression, but still maintains reasonable quality. Now, I should already have the normal map, but I'll just export that out anyway, just so that I have it as a PNG. So there's my normal. Now, what I intend to do is have this section as glowing lights. So that's pretty straightforward. I'm just going to make a new layer. I'll get rid of that metal section directly under the lights here. I'll make a new layer. I'll just fill that black. And this texture will become the lights. So basically the color value, the lighter color values will glow as emissive textures inside of Unity. So I'll save this as our, again, PNG. This one's emissive. Yeah, I know what that means. EM will do. Probably E would have been fine. Okay, now we need a specular. So a little bit of work to make a specular map out of this. Not too bad. Actually, one thing I haven't got yet is the ambient occlusion. I'll just turn off everything. So that's the ambient occlusion that we brought in from Maya in the previous video. So I'll just save this one as, again, as a PNG. OC for occlusion, or AO for ambient occlusion, but yeah, that's fine. As long as it makes sense, doesn't matter too much. Okay, now just turning on my textures again. What I want to do here for this specular map is start with a metal material. So I've taken a photo here. This is one of my old computer cases. I've just taken a photo because it's got that sort of scratched metal effect that I'm after. I could just as easily grab something from the net, like cgtextures.com. I actually went on there and couldn't find something that was quite what I was after. So just taking your own photo is a great way to get textures, and this is good enough for what I'm doing. Okay, so I've just copied that selection there, and actually I'll do this with a normal map. So I've got my normal map as a separate layer. I've brought in my PNG, and so I'm just pasting that picture over the top. And as we can see, if I zoom out and hit Control T for my transform, that's quite a large image that I've brought in. This one's slightly out of focus. I've actually got a better one. I'll just load that. Yeah, that's much better. It's just more in focus. Okay. So I'm just rotating that. I think that actually works pretty well. If I bring the highlight towards the top and it gets darker towards the bottom, it kind of gives a cool effect. Just hold down Shift to evenly smooth that. want to be very careful working with textures, with photos rather, to not do this of random directions, because you'll get distortion. Now, because we're working, this is getting compressed a fair bit into a texture. It's not as big a deal, but as a general rule of thumb, you want to be careful doing that. Okay, so I'm happy with that. I just want to darken that a little. So I'll go into my adjustments and brightness contrast, and we'll turn the brightness down a bit and the contrast up a little. Ultimately, what we're trying to get with a specular map is something with a fair bit of contrast between blacks and whites. Now I'll just get into my saturation. We'll kill the, sorry, not the lightness, the actual saturation. So there's a tiny bit of color in there. Just kill some of that. And I might also take a quick look at the levels. So image adjustments, levels. This graph basically represents where all the data is in the image. So there's a focus on a lot of area where there's very little amount of data. So if I just drag that down a bit, I'll also kill off a bit of the light and get the midtones up. Let's see how we go. Okay, probably not so much. Yep, so I think that helps a bit with the specularity. This is slightly off center, I've just realized. So I'm just going to rotate that a little. Try to keep it more or less vertical. I just need to adjust the normal map. So it's a good trick, because the normal map's so simple. What you can do is convert this into a black and white image that just highlights these edges really well. So with the normal map selected, I'm going into filter, stylize, and find edges. Now with this selected, I can firstly kill off the color, nice and easy. So images, adjustments, adjustments, saturation, and just kill off the saturation so it's nice and black and white. And we just want to flip that now. So basically, image, adjustments, invert, or Control I, it just flips the black and the white. Now, I might see if I can just get that a little darker. Just a bit. This is all very experimental. There's no one way to do this. You just need to get something with a fair bit of black and white happening in your image. So what I'll do is put this on top and overlay this probably screen mode, and just turn the opacity down a little. Yeah, I just want to get a little bit of that specular highlight from the camera flash from that photo off a little bit. Okay. Zoom back in, see. Yep, that's definitely getting there. All I want to do now is grab my original specular map. Now, I might just flatten this so I've got a single image. So I can just go layer, flatten image. I'm not saving this, I want to keep that. So I'll copy that and paste. I'll just come back here and close that without saving, just before I accidentally do that. So I've still got my original file I can reopen with all the layers. Okay, so this diffuse will kill off the color. And darken it a little. Yeah, it's just a matter of finding what sort of opacity works. We're just after a bit of a sense of depth. So by putting that over the top, it gives us a little bit of our scratching. Might take a look at our levels and see if we can just push that contrast a bit further. That's better. So that's bringing up those scratchy highlights quite nicely. So what that'll do is basically this specular map is all the dark bits won't be overly reflective, and the light bits will be a lot more reflective and more sort of metallic looking. And when I say reflective, I'm mainly talking about the highlights, reflecting the light, the specular highlights from your lights in your game. It's probably about what I want. It might take a little experimentation once in game. One more thing that's probably worth doing is just sharpening these up a little. So I can just go into filter, sharpen, and we'll just try the sharpen setting. If you want to do a stronger one, is sharpen more. So it's a pretty subtle thing, which is what we want. Don't go on too overboard. It becomes a little pixelated. But I'll actually go through and do that on each layer. And I can just use the last filter I use. Control F will do that. Sharpen. And sharpen this one. Okay, so we'll save this out. Again, as a PNG. So these are the textures that we've just created, and this final one is our spec. So we can see the ambient occlusion, normal map, an emissive map, color or diffuse map, and now we've just made our spec map. Okay, so now we're good to go into Unity and assemble this. So this is a bit straightforward. We'll just bring in those textures we just made one by one. This one is the normal map, so we just need to change that setting to normal map. That'll actually happen automatically. If you forget to do that, it'll when you plug it into your normal map channel, it'll say, "Hey idiot, you didn't make a normal map," and it'll just a little checkbox you need to fix. Oops. Okay, so there's my 5 maps. Create a new shader material. Name it. Okay, so using Unity 5 standard shader, you have 2 modes, the metallic mode and the specular mode, which is different approaches. For now, we're just using the specular setup, which is a bit more of a traditional approach for the time being. This is fine. So the albedo, which is just a PBR, so a physics-based rendering approach to doing your normal mapping. Your texturing. Essentially, it's a diffuse channel. So it lets us bring in a color map. But if we're doing some fancy PBR stuff, that's should be a little bit more focused on metallicness rather than colors. I've actually got a little bit of lighting baked into this texture map, which is kind of against the whole PBR mentality. You should be using the scene to light it. But as I said, we're trying to focus on just the traditional approach. So anyway, the albedo takes out diffuse color. The specular goes into specular. Normal map. So we can see that's coming together. And we've got an occlusion map. That'll just add any sort of the recesses, which are darker. So you'll see as I bring those in, these recesses end up a little darker. I'm using an emissive map. So that'll turn the lights on down here. Gives us a nice little glow. It's pretty cool. I might just make a quick scene because I want to be able to run around and see how this looks in game. So I'll just make a ground plane. I'll bring in a character controller. First person character. Whoops, wrong thing. prefabs, FPS, first person controller. And we'll just make a cube. Maybe make that a little bit larger. And we'll apply our material to it. That first person character has a camera on it, so we don't need the default camera. I'll delete that. Just take a quick look. I might just scale that object up. Okay, the other thing I want to do is I'll turn the lights down a bit of the default lighting. Yep, so we're getting a reasonable effect there. I could add a point light to get a little bit of glow from those, but what I will do actually is just get a bloom effect happening. So that's pretty straightforward. We'll add a component to the camera on the first person controller. No effects, image effects. I have to import those, so let's just go import package. Effects, and this holds all of our image effects. Quite nice that Unity 5 has given us this for free, the full package. Okay, so that's imported, so now I can add component, image effects appears. I'll use a bloom, just a standard bloom. I might move the character back a little. Just so it's easy to see what's happening. Now, the bloom, I'll turn on the advanced or the complex mode. Just turn up let's see. I want the threshold down a little. Like most things, this is a little bit of just experimentation to get the effect you're after. I have to make that a bit wider. Just a little bit of stretching. I'll see how it looks running the game. Yeah, it creates a little bit of a glow effect. I've got it fairly subtle at the moment, so that's just doing some very light bloom moving from the lights that glowing outwards. Look, I can just experiment with some image effects here and try to get the effect looking a bit cooler, but ultimately that's the workflow completed. So we can see this asset, we've got a reasonable specular highlight appearing on that. We're getting the effect of metal with shader, with scratches revealing on the paint, revealing the metal underneath the paint. It's creating that depth, that effect as we move around the light. Yep, so that's basically the process. Thanks for watching.